Okay. Good to go. Okay. My name is Dave Anderson, and I have been working in the Vegas area for a couple decades. And I used to do a lot of mountaineering and rock climbing. So I used to be a rock climbing instructor in Red Rock Canyon. But 4.5 years ago, my wife and I moved to Vegas, and I became more interested in birds again. I started birding when I was 8 years old and got really, really into it. Unfortunately, when you're 8 years old, or maybe when you're a teenager and you're my age, birding was not considered particularly a cool occupation to be doing. So I didn't tell any of my classmates, but I really enjoyed my early years of birding. And since I've sort of come back to Vegas, I've got into birding again. But I have a history of teaching environmental studies. I went to school and studied wildlife biology. And when we came here, I began being active with Red Rock Audubon, leading bird walks for them. And now I actually do some of my own bird walks through my company, The Wild Sites. And one of the things when I came here that I didn't expect was that there would be so many shorebirds. You know, here we are several hundred miles from the ocean, and yet we regularly see 25, 26 species of shorebirds will come through in a year. So it kind of piqued my interest, and I found them challenging to identify. Sometimes they're far away, sometimes they're moving quickly, sometimes they just look very similar to other shorebirds next to them. So I spent some time trying to figure out some ways of, figuring out which shorebirds were which. And I came up with some of my own ideas, and that's the idea behind this presentation, is to share some images, some information that's kind of general public information about them, but to also kind of tailor it to our shorebirds, because we're a little bit unique here in that we're on a migration path for a lot of shorebirds. So they don't necessarily look like when they get to their breeding ground and they're all colorful. When they pass by us, sometimes they're kind of dull in color, or they have various colors to them. So I thought I'd put together this fairly brief talk tonight on helping you identify some of the common shorebirds that we see. So I think I'm going to share my screen here, and let's see. Alrighty. Give me 1 second, because I'm trying to get this going. All right, let's try that again. Okay, do you guys see shorebirds on the top right now? Yes, okay. So we're going to talk about shorebirds, and let's see if the screen advances, and we'll go from there. Doesn't seem to want to advance. Okay. How about now? Did it advance, or is it still on the shorebird? Still on the shorebird, or did it advance?
It advanced.
It advanced. Okay, thank you. Okay, so shorebirds cover a wide group of birds, some that are sparrow-sized and some that are almost the size of a small duck. And they live in quite a few different environments, not just along the ocean shore. Some are almost entirely terrestrial. Some are only inland. You never see them on the ocean. We have, for example, least sandpipers, which are a tiny little shorebird, and our largest one that we typically have here, the long-billed curlew. So quite a few varieties of them. And so I put together this list of, these are kind of some of the common ones, and you're like, oh boy, he's going to go through every one of these. Okay, I'm going to read a book while he's talking, because this seems over my head and too many to deal with. But I'm going to try to break it down in some ways that you can take little bite-sized pieces and work on identifying these shorebirds a little bit at a time. So our shorebird identification toolbox tonight, the first thing we're going to look at is when are they here? Okay, you can determine what birds you might have just by, are you seeing them, for example, year round? Are they here only in the winter time or the non-breeding season? Are they here breeding? Do they have young here? Or do you only see them in the spring and fall when they're migrating? And so what that's doing is it's just eliminating some, because you can look at your bird book and say, oh, okay, well, there shouldn't be any here in the winter because they're going to be further south in South America. So you can kind of don't even really have to look at what they look like. You can just kind of eliminate a whole bunch of them that way. So for example, here is a range map of the greater yellowlegs. And the colors are, we'll start from the top, kind of the orange pink on the top. That's the breeding ground of the greater yellowlegs. The yellow is migration, where they're migrating through. They might stop for a little bit, but they continue to the blue on the bottom, which is their wintering grounds. You might see another color in a lot of range maps, purple, and that means they might live there all year round. And we have a few of those species here. Behavior. Here's another one that is really helpful in determining what a species is. On the left side, we have the spotted sandpiper. And the spotted sandpiper has this unique behavior where it bobs its butt up and down very fast. It looks like it's kind of doing a dance. And that's just the way it moves and feeds. So I can see that, and from quarter-mile away without binoculars, and can go, oh yeah, that's a spotted sandpiper, because it's really the only shorebird we have that does that. The American avocet, on the other hand, has a long bill, and they actually sweep it back and forth across the water to draw in different invertebrates and different things that they're eating. So it's also very striking in color. But that behavior allows me to see it, like even if the light is such that I can only see black and white color, I'll know what that bird is. Now the size, this is from the common Caribbean shorebirds. So we don't have all of these, we actually have some of them. But size is a good thing, and it can also be a bad thing for identifying shorebirds. And some shorebirds are really small, the size of a sparrow, and our largest ones can be even bigger than like a pigeon. And many are in the thrush size, like a robin is a thrush, so in that medium sized. And they're, can range from 6 inches all the way up to 18 inches. And so often shorebirds are found in a group. So that's somewhat helpful, because if you see one that's bigger or smaller than the other, it's kind of obvious. One of the hard things about sizes, though, especially when birds are a little far away, if you have a bird that is 20 feet behind the bird that is, you're looking at that's in front of you, they might almost look the same size, because that distance creates a difference or an equaling of the sizing. So you kind of have to be careful with the size. It can be useful, but you don't want to rely 100% by saying, oh, it was bigger than, a pigeon, so I know it was this. You kind of need a reference next to the bird to make size helpful in identifying the bird. Color. Okay, I have it blank here because I actually find color to be a little bit challenging for us. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we have a few birds that will breed here, but most of them are passing through migrating, so they're not quite in their breeding plumage color. So when we see them, they're sort of halfway there, or maybe they're losing their breeding plumage when they're migrating in the fall. So color can be a little bit challenging, I find. So we're going to go by some other field marks, and I'm going to talk about them besides just purely color, because I find it a little bit confusing. You can look at the bill size and how it's feeding to help you determine what species it is. If you look at this bird on the left side here, it has a very long curved bill, and you can see how it puts its bill in and grabs this worm that's fairly deep in this U-shaped tunnel. Whereas this bird next to it has a straight bill, it's going straight down. This bird has sort of a grabbing bill, so it can grab worms that are close to the surface. This bird's bill is very stout, so it can actually dig a hole with the bill and grab this mussel. This bird is just picking things off the surface. It's running along. This bird's doing that, but it's got a little bit more of a scoop on the bill to turn over little rocks and look underneath the rocks. So kind of how it's feeding and its bill shape can also be great indicators of what species it is. Sound. Sound is another great tool to help you with the identification of birds. There are quite a few apps that you can download to your smartphone, and you can listen to what the bird is supposed to sound like, but you can actually record the bird singing or calling, and it will tell you, if you're close enough and it's loud enough, what species it is. And there's a few species that is actually particularly helpful for here in Las Vegas. So let's get right into it, and we'll start with a group of birds. This is kind of a subgroup called the plovers. And the plovers contain one of our most common shorebirds that we see here. And I bet everyone has seen, and if they haven't seen, they probably unknowingly heard this guy. This is called a killdeer. And the killdeer is sort of a robin-sized bird. And if you look at its bill, it has a very short bill, so it's not digging deep to get things. It's got fairly long legs, and it runs around and grabs things on the surface. And almost all the plovers do this. The killdeer also has rings around its neck, and this one in the back, you can see it's got 2 rings. And that'll be helpful in separating it from some other plovers that we have. So killdeer we have year round. They'll breed here. In fact, I bet there's some that have hatched and are running around right now in Las Vegas. So they're a very common one. You can see them in wet areas, but you can also see them in the middle of like a gravel area. They nest right on the ground. They don't build a nest. And one of the unique things about this bird's behavior is they do a broken wing trick. Since they nest right on the ground, they're very susceptible to predators getting their eggs or getting their little chicks. So what one of the parents will do, if it sees, like, let's say a coyote or even a person, they'll pretend they have a broken wing, and they'll kind of drag the wing along and like make a bunch of noise saying, "Hey, look at me, I'm an easy meal, come get me, leave my eggs alone." So the killdeer are fairly common and pretty special birds because of this behavior. Another plover we have is a semi-palmated plover. And this guy, as you can see, only has 1 large band. And these guys are almost half the size of the killdeer. They're much smaller. They're kind of like a large sparrow, and they have a very stubby bill as well. And we see these just during migration. Another one we see during migration, this one is about the same size as a semi-palmate, is the snowy plover. And they can be even whiter than this, and they get their name from their coloring of being almost a white plover. And you can sometimes see one of these little neck collars coming around, but oftentimes they'll just be white on the front. And once again, these guys have short little bills, and they'll chase down stuff and to eat and catch. One that we rarely see, although it was one was seen just last week by a friend of mine, this is called the black-bellied plover. And this is a good example. And this plover is a little bit bigger than the killdeer, so size reference. And this one, as you can see, its name, you can start to see the black belly on the plover here, but it's not quite in breeding plumage usually when they're here with us. They are in this sort of in-between coloring, and they can be challenging to identify because of that. So a lot of our birds look this way. They're not quite fully dressed in their breeding plumage, but they have some indicators like this black belly to give us some clues. Okay, here's another common one that we can see year-round here. And this is the spotted sandpiper that I mentioned earlier. This is the one that bobs its tail up and down. They have a short bill, and they do a little bit of both. They'll grab something right on the surface, but they'll also use their bill to go underneath the water and grab things. But they change. So this, the one on the left, is in breeding plumage, and you can see the spots on it. But the non-breeding, or what they look like in the winter, is like this on the right. They lose their spots. So it can be a little bit confusing, and you might think it's a totally different bird, but it just changes its color when it's not breeding anymore. Okay, here's another one that we see in the fall, winter, and spring here. The summer, they kind of tend to disappear. This is a Wilson snipe, and they have a very short neck. They can actually stretch it a little bit, but when you see them, they're often holding their neck very close to their body. They are very well camouflaged, and you don't usually see them out in like the open in a mud flat or kind of in shallow water. They're usually tucked right in with the vegetation, and they have this really long bill that they probe down into the mud for insects. And if some folks are from the East Coast, the American woodcock is a very similar bird to our snipe. Okay, here's one that we have right now that is usually here mostly in the summertime, and they breed here. This is the American avocet, and they're a spectacularly beautiful bird. They're white and black body, and they have kind of a cinnamon colored, excuse me, head. But what makes them unique, and the kind of bluish legs, they're just spectacular looking. What makes them really unique and easy to identify, besides their obvious color, is that they're pretty large. They're oops, yeah, see if I can get back now. Yep. Their bill is really cool because it's this kind of hooked, curved shape. And like I said, they use it like sort of like an old-time scythe, which is used to like cut grass that you move back and forth. They kind of put it in the water and swing it back and forth and grab food that way. And if you can actually tell the sex of the bird by its bill. The males have a much straighter bill than the females, and I don't actually know the reason. Maybe Alex knows that, but somehow they developed that. So if you see two side by side and one has a really curved bill, that's usually the female. Another one of our birds that breeds here, that's here right now, is the spectacular black-necked stilt. This is about the same size as an avocet, but a little bit skinnier of a bird. They have pink legs, very striking black and white, almost iridescent colors. And they have a long straight bill that they will use to grab things kind of underwater. You usually see both of these species not right next to the edge, but they're usually their feet are usually in the water, and they're running around grabbing things. And this is called it has a black neck, which is a little hard to tell in this photo, but that's the name of this bird. It's the only stilt that we have breeding here. Okay, now we've done some of the easy ones, some of the large ones that you might be able to see fairly easily if you go to Henderson Bird Viewing Preserve. And now we're going to delve into the tricky ones. So we have two species of yellowlegs, the greater and the lesser. And the greater is bigger. They did a good job naming. The lesser is smaller. But some key takeaways of how to tell these two apart is one of the best ways is if you have them right next to each other, because you can tell one is bigger than the other. But lots of times that doesn't happen, so you have to resort to some other field marks. And if you look at their bill, if you look at the greater yellowlegs, the bill is more than 1 a half times the width of the head here. Whereas, move this a little bit. Let's see. Whereas the, there we go. The lesser is much smaller. It almost is the same width as the head. And I find that to be one of the best ways of telling these birds apart. The other way that I personally like to tell them apart is looking at the wings in relation to the tail. So on the lesser, the wings extend a little bit past the tail, like it's almost obvious. Okay, this is definitely past the tail. I'm just doing the call now by accident. I hit the cursor. Let me see if I can go back. There we go. On the greater yellow legs, if you look, it's kind of even, maybe a tiny bit longer than the tail, but it's pretty even. So those are like the two main ways that I like to tell them apart. There are some other characteristics. The lesser usually has a little bit more white on the breast, but I find that challenging to tell. But the other way, the last way, is by sound. So I'm going to play the greater yellow legs, and they kind of have a three-part song, or three-part call, excuse me. And let's go ahead and listen to that. So it's going do 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 do, sort of that three-part. Now this lesser yellow legs usually does one or two, sometimes it does three, but let's go ahead and listen to that one. So very, very different. Okay, another one that looks a little bit like the lesser greater, or the lesser yellow legs, is the solitary sandpiper. The one thing the solitary sandpiper has is it has much more white coloring on the breast, spots on the back, but it has this very bold eye ring. If you look at the lesser and greater, they also have eye rings, but they're not nearly as bold as the solitary sandpiper. Solitary sandpiper has a little bit more greenish legs. They're not really yellow or orange, and that's another helpful. And these guys are even smaller than the lesser yellow legs. So, okay, we're delving in deep here. We've got long-billed and short-billed dowitchers. These two, you would think, okay, well, the long-billed's got a longer bill. Even when they're side by side, they're pretty challenging to identify. There are some subtle things that you can look at. The long-billed dowitcher typically has a little bit of a hump on its back. And if you see a short-billed dowitcher, a young one, it has a lot of sort of reddish color in these feathers in the back here. Also on the shoulders, but especially these tertiary feathers here in the back. And the long-billed will not have that. There's also, you can identify them by sound is a really good way. This is the long-billed. Kind of a single note. And then we have the short-billed. Sorry about that. Let's try that again. Sort of a series of calls. They sometimes do a little short note, but then they'll go. So they do a few calls together. So I find that particularly helpful of telling these apart. If you're a photographer, or if you have very good eyes, another excellent way of telling them apart is to look at underneath their wings. So if you look at these feathers here in particular, you notice that the long-billed has much more white in its coloring than the short-billed, which has much darker striping, I guess you'd call it. And it seems very subtle, and it is, but this is actually one of the best ways if you happen to be a photographer and can catch them in flight. This is a good way. For example, don't be too disheartened if you're like, oh man, Dave's showing me all this stuff. I'm never going to be able to do this. For example, on the shorebird survey that I'm participating in, we're not even separating long-billed or short-billed dowitchers. We're just calling them dowitchers because sometimes even people, when they have them in the hand, they have a hard time identifying them. So don't worry about them too much. Just know that they're a dowitcher, and they, if you see them feeding, they are in constant motion. They're kind of like an oil rig going up and down, up and down, up and down. They're driving their bill into the sediment and searching for food. So they're very active in their feeding, very rhythmic. Okay, let's go on to the phalaropes. Phalaropes are really cool birds. Shorebirds, you can see them on land, but you can also see them swimming like a duck, basically. And some of the phalaropes will spin in circles to kind of churn up the insects to eat them and catch them. So here we have the Wilson's phalarope. They have kind of reddish orange in the neck. So this is in breeding plumage. This is a male, or no, actually, sorry, this is a female. This phalaropes are one of the species that the female is a little brighter than the male, if I remember correctly. They also have a black eye ring, but we rarely see them in their breeding plumage. Most of them, when they get to us or they arrive to us, they're migrating species. They don't nest here. They look more like this. They're kind of plain. They have brown on the back, white on the front. The problem is there's another phalarope that we also get. And so that is the red-necked phalarope. And the red-necked has more red, not only on the back in the breeding plumage, but also in the front of the neck. But in the non-breeding plumage, they will often look like this. And the way I like to remember them is they're more white and black. But you know, Nike, the shoe company, they have the swoosh. I kind of think that the mark around their eye looks like the Nike swoosh, and that kind of helps me remember them. So if you look at the Wilson's phalarope, they don't really have that. They just have a little bit of coloring, whereas the red-necked phalarope has this black swoosh. Okay, moving right along here to the hardest ones. I saved the hardest for last. We have a few more after these guys, but these guys are definitely the hardest ones. These are the small sandpipers. People call them peeps because that's the noise they make. And these are all about the size of a sparrow, maybe a little bit bigger. The most common one that we can see them in the fall, winter, and spring. They'll leave us for the summer to nest further north. But the good thing about telling these guys is look at their legs. They have yellow legs, yellow to kind of, I guess you could say, orangish or tannish legs. They also have a slightly curved bill that's roughly the size of its head. Remember those yellow legs though, because the next ones, the Western Sandpiper has dark colored legs, almost black. They typically have a much bigger bill that has a little bit of a kind of hook on the end. Once again, these are not quite in breeding plumage, but they still typically will have some rust in the shoulders, rust on the tail, sometimes rust around the face. They're all roughly the same size. And then we have the Semipalmated Sandpiper. This one is showing kind of greenish legs. Sometimes their legs look black. They never look the bright yellow of the least. And if you look at its bill, it's a little stubbier than some of the others. So what's really helpful is to have all of these small little sandpipers together so that you can identify them. So I took this photo here in Las Vegas. This is in a concrete weir where the Las Vegas wash flows, and it acts kind of like a little mud flat. It grows algae. The algae has bugs, and these guys are eating the various bugs. So on the left side here, you can't quite see the legs. This one, you can see the legs of this one in behind. This is a least. This is also a least, even though I can't see the legs, but its bill is a little curved. Let's look at this one on the far right. This Western kind of has the red in the back. Its bill is longer. It's a little hooked. And then in the middle, we have the semi-palmated with kind of a stouter bill. And these two, look here, have black legs. So black legs is going to be these guys. The least has yellow legs. I have a couple other views to help us. So here we go. You can see the Western's a little bit bigger typically. Also tends to have a bigger head. The least, you can see its yellow legs poking out. And then the semi-palmated, it's black legs, a little stubbier bill. And then if you look head on, the semi-palmated and the Western can look similar, but look how thick the bill is on the semi-palmated compared to the Western. The Western kind of scoops in with a little bit of a bulge out the end. So these are some of the minute details that, that I've kind of learned over the years. But some of the basic ones, by just looking at the leg color, will immediately reduce your options, and then you can kind of go from there. The Baird Sandpiper is a little bit bigger than these, not quite the size of like a robin, but bigger than a sparrow. And if you look at these guys have dark legs. They have kind of a curved bill. You're like, okay. But look at the wings. Look how far they stick past the tail. That's the telltale sign for these guys. They have very long wings. These are only seen in migration. Usually we see them more in the fall than the spring. Shorebirds sometimes take different routes when they go from their wintering grounds to their breeding grounds, and then when they return, they take a different path, and the Baird seems to be one of those. We also, more in the fall, will get sanderlings. These tend to be more white and black in color. They have dark legs, a dark bill, but what they don't have is a toe. All the other sandpipers have this little toe that sticks out the back, and these guys don't have that. Once again, you're going to need a spotting scope or a camera probably to see this, but that's a unique feature that the sanderlings don't have. And they're just passing through Vegas. They don't nest here. Okay, so here's my flow chart for the small peeps in southern Nevada. Let's start on the upper left. We got leg color. Okay, what is the leg color? If it's yellow for these small peeps, more than likely it's a least sandpiper. You can stop there. If it's not yellow, if it's dark, you got to keep going. What if there's no hind toe? Okay, good. We go straight to sanderling. They're the only ones that have that. What if it does have a hind toe? But what if the wings extend beyond the tail? Okay, Baird Sandpiper. We keep going down the list here. Okay, what if the wings and tail are the same length? Okay, is the bill the same length as the head or longer? Is it slightly drooped at the end? Probably a Western Sandpiper. If the bill is stubby, shorter than the head, not too much of a droop at the end, then it could be a semi-palmated. There are slight variations that maybe this wouldn't work for every bird, but I find this fairly helpful to kind of narrow it down and work your way through it. Okay, we're on the home stretch. We've got just a few more. Stay with me here. One bird that's just been seen recently is the dunlin. Once again, these vary incredibly from their winter to their breeding plumage. And we've actually seen some that look like the left one. They've got a black belly spot. They have a very long, elongated bill. In the wintertime, they're more plain looking with brown on top, white underneath, but they still, of course, will have that really long bill. We can sometimes see pectoral sandpipers. Notice the leg color. These are yellow, but notice the size. These are two western sandpipers. So this bird is almost twice the size of these guys. They have a little bit of a medium colored bill with a little yellow here, and they have a brown crown, and they have this kind of very defined line on their chest from the brown speckled to the white belly. And we will usually see these more often in the fall as well, not that much in the spring migration. These are once again just passing through. Same with the Stilt Sandpiper. These are even bigger than the pectoral, a little bit bigger, and they have a long bill. But notice their legs are kind of even a brighter yellow, and their posture is much more upright. The positioning on their legs seems to be a little bit further back, so they often seem to stand taller. All right, this one is a really big one. This is a willet. These are commonly found on the East Coast and West Coast, but every once in a while they'll show up here, and when they're flying, they're very easy to identify because they have these white and black patches. And these are almost the size of a small duck. These are large sandpipers. We just have two more. We have the marbled Godwit, which is about the size of a willet as well. And they have a really cool, slightly upturned but pink base to their bill. And we can see these both in the spring and the fall migrating through. For some reason, they're often seen at Lake Mead. They seem to like that spot, but you can see them at Henderson Bird Preserve. They're a very large shorebird. And then our biggest shorebird, and I think in my favorite, is the long-billed curlew. I mean, look at that beak. Talk about adaptation to eating certain types of worms deep in their holes and pull them out. I think they're just really cool birds. And they don't nest right here, but they actually they'll nest, I think they nest in probably northern Nevada. They definitely nest in near the Great Salt Lake. I've seen them there. So, and they nest a little bit inland. They have their nests a little bit away from the edge of the water, but we will get them in the spring and the fall. And yeah, they're one of my favorite shorebirds for sure. And they're big. They're our largest shorebird, like I said. Okay, that's the end of the ID, but I couldn't leave without at least giving you a quiz. So what is this? Okay, this is kind of like Jeopardy. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, everyone take a look at it. And what do you see? Look at the overall structure of the bird. Look at the wings, the tail, the color of the legs, the color of the bill, the size of the bill. And I'll give you a hint that I'm going to tell you what it is. And this is, it's bigger than like a robin, let's say. So it's not one of the really small ones. Okay. Everyone have a guess? All right. Ooh, let's see if it's going to advance. It's a lesser yellowlegs. So it's got a bill that's basically the same width as the head. It's got bright yellow legs, and the tail extends, or the wings, excuse me, extend past the tail. So it's a lesser yellowlegs. Cool. So that's the end of the presentation. And let's see. Okay. So does anyone have any questions or comments about the presentation?
I'll just hop in before there are any questions. I don't see anything in the chat, but I think the helpful thing to be here is if you go to the reactions down at the bottom of the screen, there's the option to raise hands. So look for that little like happy face at the bottom, then click on that and you can see the option to raise a hand. So that way we know who's up next. We try to keep it in order. So Michael's got the swing of it. Michael's doing it right. Michael, how about you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Oh, I didn't have a question, Alex. I just wanted to say this is a great presentation. I really benefited from it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, don't be intimidated. I included a lot of stuff, but just take it piece by piece and enjoy yourselves out there looking at shorebirds.
I've got a question, David.
Yes.
So when I'm thinking about bird identification, I'm thinking about 5 things in general. And you definitely touched upon all of those things with shorebirds, because of course, when you're identifying shorebirds, you're using the same 5 modes or ways of making a diagnosis of the species of bird, right? And so you've got your sound. That can be really helpful with dowitchers and yellowlegs, of course, and some of the other birds all make sounds that are really unique. Like to me, the sandpiper has a really unique sound, so sound's helpful. There's the pattern and the color, although it sounds like that can be misleading because you have birds that might be in molt and they might have different features depending on the time of year. There's behavior, and behavior can include the way that the bird is foraging, like how it's foraging, how deep in the water it is. If it's swimming, well, it might be a fallow rope. It could be a yellowlegs, they'll swim too, but it could be a fallow rope. So there's behavior. There's habitat and time of year. Like right now, it seems like anything goes. But there are other times of year where maybe we're only expecting, a couple species of shorebirds. So habitat and time of year, like our context, is really helpful. And then our size and shape, but that can be misleading. But of course, if you have a couple species together and you have good references, you can certainly gauge size really well. If it's just like one bird standing alone in a distant puddle, you have nothing to compare it to. It's gonna be really difficult. So those are like the 5 things that I think of. And when I'm doing like bird skills or bird ID, that's what I'm thinking of. If you had to say like the top 3 or 4 of any of those things, whether it be like bill shape or bill length or leg color or leg length, just like off the top of your head, what would you suggest to this group to really like start with? And let's just say that like you have a shorebird and you have 15 seconds to take in as much information as you can in 15 seconds. What does David Anderson do in those 15 seconds? What are you looking at?
Well, of course, there's a lot of variables, and it's going to vary a little bit. Like, how close am I? What is the light like? Can I see color? But I would say like bill shape is for me is really a good one, because it just really narrows it down to the group of shorebirds that you're kind of looking at. And then, boy, I think I would have to say for the smaller shorebirds, I'm going to really try to look for leg color right away. Because like I mentioned, with the peeps, the yellow legs of the sandpiper is just going to help narrow it down. And also for the yellow legs too, maybe separating the yellow legs from a solitary sandpiper, or the pectoral and the stilt sandpiper. So I think like looking at the bill and looking at the legs, and that'll morph quickly into the body shape and the wings. I think that's probably what I'll go for first. Yeah, that would probably be it. I've become more of an earbirder with shorebirds. I never used to really listen to that at all, but that is like simultaneously happening in my head now, where I'm either consciously or subconsciously kind of taking in the sounds around me, and that might be the thing that trumps everything else of what I've seen, of what I've heard. So I think the thing to do with shorebirds, like a lot of bird identification, is not to be upset if your one field mark that you remember doesn't work. Sometimes you need to use a combination of like 2 or 3 to get to the bird. And that happens with a lot of things like hawks, like sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper's hawks. Sometimes you'll use several factors to get to the bird. So I didn't really answer your question, but I kind of just went through my process of how I go to shorebirds. I don't necessarily have a top one, I guess, to go for. Yeah. Oh, there's a question in the chat. Should I address that? Does that work?
Yeah.
So someone, Deborah asked, I think, what are the bird survey hours listed all day? Are there specific shifts? So on this Saturday, we're doing at 7 o'clock. I'm leading just a shorebird workshop to identify things. And then the 29th and the 30th, we're doing shorebird surveys. And I don't think too many people are coming along with those, so it's going to be like overly crowded. So I believe if you would like to sort of volunteer and help come along, there might not be that much teaching because we need to kind of move through the areas, and I might be counting birds pretty quickly and not showing like all the details of them. But I don't know what the best way for that would be. Feel free to contact me. And somehow I can make my contact information available. Yeah, I don't know if Morgan or Alex, if you have any thoughts on that, but I'm happy to chat with people individually, I guess. So. Oh, I happen to be signed up through now. Okay, yeah. Yeah, Deborah, I will somehow I will maybe I don't know how to do this, how I can exchange my email with her through Zoom, but there must be a way to make that happen. So I can contact you and talk to you directly about it.
Maybe you can go into the chat and put it in directly, just like
Okay.
Yeah, you can write it directly to Deborah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just put if everyone sees it, that's fine. So
how did you hear about this through Endow?
I just unmuted myself. I'm a master naturalist, they call us, through the University of Nevada Extension. And that was one of the partners. And so I've just randomly signed up for things as I see them.
Cool. Okay.
great.
And there's a volunteer coordinator, and you can volunteer, and then sometimes you're contacted, sometimes you're not. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you just want to shoot me an email, Deborah, and then I can tell you what I know about that. I mean, it's basically just when and where we're meeting and how long it's going to be, and yeah, we can yeah, happy to have you on board. So.
Well, unless there's a last second question coming in, I think we can probably just wrap it up and everyone can enjoy the rest of their evening, and then hopefully get out this weekend, look for some shorebirds because they are in a hurry to get where they want to go. The window for shorebird migration is open. It'll close at some point in May, and then you have killdeer, you have avocets, you have stilts to look at for the summer, and then these shorebirds come back in actually pretty early on. They tend to get their business over with pretty fast in the summer. We'll start to see some shorebirds actually return southbound in late July and August, although it's pretty warm at that point. So you have to really want it if you want to go see those shorebirds. Right now is a great opportunity to see them, especially when they're in their alternate plumage, the alternate plumage being their breeding plumage. That's your fancy technical term for that. So get out there this weekend and have fun with this. It's a learning process. There's always something to learn when it comes to birding and shorebirds in particular.